learning, a process we indulge in, they say, from the cradle to the grave. In fact, the way things are right now, companies need to be very conscious about how well they have invested in the learning and development of their staff, because end of the day, we are looking at a time which indeed is unprecedented in the recent history that we could think of. Talking about learning and development investments, they say once a finance manager asked the HR manager, what if we spend on the learning of our people and if they leave? The reply was also a question. What if we don't spend and they stay? Quite a dilemma, a catch-22 for any organization. Today, in this episode of Bisnomics, we will be talking to veterans in the field of learning and development in human resource management in their respective organizations on how to do this right, because end of the day, on how well your staff, your teams are ready to face tomorrow depends on how well they have invested money and time on learning and development today. I am Tharindra Amarasekara. Welcome to your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. This is Bisnomics. Joining me for this discussion in the first segments, I have with me Kaushal Mendis, who is a veteran in the field of human resource management. Kaushal, welcome back to Bisnomics.
Thank you very much for having me again, Tharindra. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kaushal, let's talk about how important learning and development is, because we hear this echoing cry from the industry that, okay, times are uncertain, budgets are tight, so first thing that gets cut sometimes is what? Training or learning and development. Is this the right thing to do? And is learning and development something which is only limited to large organizations, or should an entrepreneur with a small team or a small and medium enterprise owner also be focusing on learning and development? Over to you.
Learning and development, Tharindra, is a strategic function. So, someone could say an organization, if they have the thought of, okay, we are in unprecedented times, so we don't have money, so we are going to chop the learning and development budget. I don't think that they are long-sighted. Learning and development being a strategic function, what they primarily looking at is focusing on shaping the organizational culture, fostering new ways of thinking, developing behaviors, and also aligning the organizational strategy, aligning to the organizational strategy. So, that is what they are looking at. So, if we look at learning and development through this lens, I am sure it is not applicable only for a multinational organization or a blue chip, but it is well applicable for SME too. Now, Gallup has recently done a study where they say, this study has done among millennials. Out of the respondents, 89% of the millennials, they have said L&D is pretty important in their lives. And out of that survey group, 59% of the millennials has said if they are looking for another move, their next job, what they look at is learning and development interventions.
Oh, wow.
So, which clearly shows
it's a critical KPI.
It's a critical KPI from the individual perspective also. So, this is the generation whom we are dealing with. Now, imagine the situation, again coming to your definition introduction today, if your employees are not trained,
and if you are stuck with them,
if you are stuck with them and you are putting the organization at risk, they are putting the organization at risk, then what happens? In organizations, we say people are our most valued asset. So, and any business leader, the best what they can ask for is a super team. So, if your team is a well trained, well developed team, the sky would be the limit. So, your bottom lines will be soaring. And in this perspective, L&D is not another initiative, but it is a strategic initiative to fuel the growth of the organization irrespective of the size of it.
So, it's not a should, it's a must.
It's a must.
And what about from a SME perspective now? SME sector sometimes might feel, okay, look, we are anyway really finding it hard to pay the salaries sometimes, or let's say we don't have those big budgets or the big coffers, as they say. But is it something that even a small, let's say a small startup with a few team members, should they also be taking a more planned approach to L&D?
Yes, I would say, Tharindra, when it comes to L&D, that you have to bust a load of money is a myth.
It's a myth.
It's a myth. It's basically how you look at it, how innovative you are. Because nowadays in the modern day and age, the internet has oceans and oceans of resources. If you are really innovative,
and free too sometimes, most of the time.
Most of the time. So, if you are innovative and if you really know what to look for, it's the facilitation. So, if you ever look here that because of money constraints, because of funding constraints, that I cannot facilitate the L&D initiatives in my organization, I don't think it's the right way to do it. Any organization, any scale, it's the way you look at it, it's the way you interpret it. It's the will you need to have in terms of helping your employees. If you have that, I'm sure any scale of organization, even a small SME who's struggling at the peak of this pandemic, they can do it.
Sometimes I'm going to interrupt you there,
Yeah.
Kaushal. We see this wrong trend where companies at the start of the year will plan, okay, we want to spend this much money on learning and development.
Yeah.
And then closer to the end of the reporting time, they realize some money is left. And sometimes people who might not really be even benefiting from that, they just get picked and said where they just want to meet that budgetary requirement. But as you very correctly said, it's not a budgetary intervention, it's a strategic initiative and intervention, isn't it?
Yeah. So, now just to complement that, at the beginning of the year, yes, of course, looking at your turnovers, that you will set aside some amount of money.
Yeah, a budget.
A budget, yeah. So, the traditional way of doing it would be, okay, that you've got money, we'll get the training prospectus from some other organization, a training facilitator, we will do a random training needs analysis, okay, then we'll start sending people, and okay, then we'll count the training number of training man days, put that on a nice dashboard, and get over that you're happy.
More of a let's tick the boxes L&D.
That's tick the box. But right now, it is not the case, because every organization, they're struggling. They're struggling because the environment has become so much competitive, and so whatever you do need to reflect in your bottom lines. So, unless otherwise your L&D strategy is complementing your business strategy, I think as the business heads, as the HR heads, as the learning and development heads, you are not doing the justice to the organization. So, that is one of the key areas what you need to look at in crafting your L&D strategy.
COVID-19. Now, we can't talk of any discipline or any industry that has not been affected by the pandemic. Kaushal, as someone who is in the forefront of human resource management, you work with the people on a day in, day out basis, you are heavily involved with so many professional associations which are into human resource management. You see the action happening, what I call a front row seat to the action. How has COVID-19 had an impact on learning and development processes, let's say in Sri Lanka or even globally?
I think both in Sri Lanka and globally, it has shifted drastically, Tharidu. Now, the global organizations went through unprecedented times. We haven't come across any situations like this. We didn't know what to do. Right? So, when all of a sudden countries announced lockdowns, the first thing what we wanted to do was we wanted to communicate with each other from a remote perspective and start engaging people. So, that was the very first challenge the businesses had. When we started engaging on a virtual platform, then we said, okay, why not we look at infusing knowledge to bridge that gap. So, what happened was, during the past 10-12 months, a lot of organizations, I would say 100% of the organizations have moved into a virtual model of learning and development. Even prior to this pandemic period, yes, organizations had e-learning. Yes. They had virtual learning.
More on nice to have basis, isn't it?
More nice to have, say that, okay, that's E. Yeah. But the amount of significance what we pay right now, it wasn't there. Mostly in terms of learning and development, what we believed was in-person learning. Oh, that you go, you attend a workshop, attend a seminar, attend a class with physical presence. Things got changed. Now, the multinational organization what I am working at, so we operate more than 120 countries. So, every year there are 2-3 conferences happening on a global scale or a regional scale where we look forward to go to.
Correct.
But the ironical fact is, Tharindu, depending on the logistical nightmares and the costs that we won't be able to send a lot of people. My HR department, my department has about 30 people, but maximum 2 to 3 people will attend because the organizations can't afford.
Correct.
The magic happening right now,
Everyone is a part
everyone is a part of it. And in this organization, for a week at least we have about 2 to 3 knowledge downloads, global, regional knowledge downloads happening because we maximize these platforms. So what happens is relatively the longer training programs have become snippet sized, very bite sized training programs, and have become more frequent.
Correct.
So thereby,
and that helps, I believe, with more reinforcement as well.
Exactly.
Earlier in the traditional model, learning and development had this issue of reinforcement. You have a very good program today, 1 week later people are back to doing what they were anyway doing.
Exactly.
But this helps you to reinforce better.
So it has a lot of reinforcement. You do something today, you follow up in a week, you follow up in another month. So it's an ongoing story. So which is really good, and not purely from an organizational perspective, but when it comes to the education industry itself, even the global top-notch universities, they have changed their gears. Previously, if you are to go follow executive development program in a world-renowned university,
the Harvards and the
Oxfords,
INSEADs.
So it's pretty tough because you have to apply, you have to invest a lot of amount of money and time.
Correct. Now, and you're looking at about 2 million rupees just for a 5-day program.
Talk about it. Now what happens is, even they have cut down their longer term programs and they have made bite-sized programs, very topic specific programs. Now for an example, let's say if I need to look at digital transformation, I can go off the shelf, buy a course and attend and finish and get myself certified. So there has been a drastic shift in the learning and development industry, that arena, during this past 10 to 12 months.
Kaushal, now people are working from home or they are coming to office, they work in a blended mode, and then I believe working from home and in this blended approach has its own challenges and problems. Then comes the work pressure. Amidst all this, how do you keep people motivated to learn? How do you do that?
That's a catch. So if you take learning in isolation, this won't work. Now I can still remember when I was
learning for the sake of learning.
Learning for the sake of learning, because it has no correlation to any other factors. When I was a junior, when I was pushing people for training programs, I at times had to go to my CEO and say, look here, that this gentleman is not attending the program, that you need to send a mail, you need to send a stinker. But because we were taking it as an initiative. Right. Correct. Now what you need to do is, you need to align your business and the individual needs.
If you do this learning, this is how you can do the job better.
This is how you can do the job better. And again, I'm pitching it with my previous thought and yours about SMEs and different classes of organization, irrespective of the size. If your leadership really believes in a learning culture, if they are the facilitators of it, if they are the sponsors of this learning culture, then inevitably the layers down the line will fall in line. They think, okay, for me, the learning is a part of this culture of this organization, so I need to align with it. So that's one part of it. Number two is where you align it with the individual career paths. So if I'm an executive today, and if I'm if my line manager is really interested on my career path, if my line manager is having discussions on my career path and show me the path, and then I will have aspirations to build my career, then I will understand the importance of learning and development. So a self-interest will be generated. So I think being line managers, being functional heads, being business leaders, taking active interest on one's career path and showing him the path is one of the key parameters for them to drive this learning culture. Then what we need to do is we need to link it with their performances. So say, look here, these are the KPIs you have. In order to do this successfully, this is what you need to have. And promote that learning culture, facilitate it, and also give them the importance of it. And in my organization, what we do is, we incentivize people to learn. So when they go study a program, we reimburse, so we support them. And finally, we make it fun. because people need to enjoy learning
Absolutely.
rather than making a
They
additional.
remember the experience.
They remember the experience.
A
Yeah.
fantastic opening thoughts there, Kaushal. You're definitely setting the tone on the right direction here. Coming up, how can you plan your learning and development activities of the organization in a more effective manner? Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics. Our focus today is on the learning and development process of an organization, especially in a time of a pandemic where we have been asked, in fact we have been forced to relearn, first unlearn and then relearn everything that we knew about, because business as it was known has completely changed. How can we do learning and development in an effective manner in a way that the organization maximizes its return and also the people can maximize the effectiveness of what they learn? And joining me for this discussion is Kaushal Mendis. Kaushal, let's talk about planning L&D, because as you very correctly said, a lot of people tend to take it in a more ad hoc basis as a one-off thing. But no, it has to be a part of the bigger organization strategy. How can an HR manager who is watching this, or maybe some, let's say a learning and development manager who is watching this show, how can that person plan the learning and development activities for the entire year in a much more strategic and organized manner? I'm sure you know the tips and tricks. This is the platform to share it.
Lovely. So, a business leader, I would say a chief executive officer, his primary objective towards shareholders is to deliver the value. But from a HR perspective, HR leader needs to look at the business perspective as well as need to look at the people perspective also. So, he needs to have a fine balance between these two elements. On this scenario, when someone is trying to craft the L&D strategy, what he needs to look at is, okay, what's the organizational strategy for this year? Your organization, as an organization, it could have plans to expand. It could have plans to diversify you. It could have plans to discontinue a certain product line and to start something fresh, which means you as the organization requires different skill sets. It's not the organization who requires the skill set, it's the people. So, you need to take the direction of the organization into consideration. Okay, where's the organization heading in terms of fueling that path, fueling that drive? What is the responsibility of the HR department in terms of facilitating this? So, that's number one. Number two is marrying this L&D with performance, because finally it's people. People do, we will not go to a machine and say, okay, that you've delivered X number of products last year, so you need to do X number, so I'll give you this training. We don't do it for a machine unless we upgrade the software. So, likewise, it's upgrading the software of the humans. Correct. So, we get things done from them. So, what we need to tell is, a lot of organizations, multinationals I've seen, they marry performance management and L&D. They call it the one conversation, because in one simple conversation you tackle both these activities. Now, let's take a typical performance evaluation discussion where your line manager and a subordinate would have. So, they look at the past year's performances, KPIs, achievements, and if the subordinates say, okay, that I have achieved ABCD things, whereas I have failed XYZ, and the discussion will go on to say why you have failed XYZ. Okay, I didn't know certain things, so that you will identify that there was a knowledge gap. Then you will come in an intervention to bridge that gap. So, it is that we look back and try to sort it out where it will not repeat in the future. Likewise, in the same discussion, when we agree our KPIs, when we agree our contributions for the next year from an individual perspective, I could ask, if you are my subordinate, I could ask, okay, Taridu, these are your deliverables. In terms of delivering this, I do understand these things are new to you. How can I help? So, it becomes a discussion and you say, okay, these are my self initiatives, this is these are the help what I am expecting from the organization. So, you make it a discussion, so you identify what are the individual needs, then you overlay it with the organizational priorities and you come up with a plan. Then you get certain things on the performance element. Then on a separate perspective, the business environment is changing on a very rapid scale. It's a VUCA environment and we really don't know.
You need to keep repeating, I mean, kind of renewing your
so we as individuals we need to be agile.
Kaushal, what you're saying is the plan we made today, come tomorrow it might be a new set of skills that our people need and we need to adjust according to that.
We should be able to adjust. And also in terms of the business, people need to be agile and business needs to be sustainable as well. So, I call it the sustain agility. So, for the business to be sustain agility, we need to have proper leaders. So, from the good performance like consistent performance, we will identify people and we have to develop them to take future leadership roles. So, that is the third part of L&D. So, you identify high performance, you identify high potentials and you give them a learning journey. So, you need to put all these things together, organization's directions, the performance direction and also the succession direction together, mix it, ensure a fine balance between all the three elements and plan your L&D strategy. As you correctly said, since the environment what we operate is changing on a very rapid note, you should be able to change things. So, that flexibility needs to be there.
Kaushal, now a rallying and an echoing cry from the industry, from a lot of HR practitioners is that we send our people for training and development programs, but they come back, few weeks later they are going back to doing the same thing. Nothing has changed. But in your experience, how do you really get people after the training program? Now, if they go to the training program, fine, they collect the certificate, they come back, everything's good. But how do you make sure that they truly implement what they have learned? What kind of mechanisms are needed? Because sometimes the HR managers also might be like, oh, you went for the training, good, so do what you were taught. But I don't think it's that simple. What's your opinion on this?
Tarada, sending a person for a training program and expecting him to outperform is the least thing that you can expect as a business leader.
It's something more than a miracle.
It's more than a miracle. It's not going to work because generally one-day training programs, you take it as a break from work, right? So, in order to
good perspective.
That's a truth.
Yes,
that's a truth. You go, you have a nice meal, you learn something. But what happens? What you learn in the morning, at the end of the program, about 4:30, 5 o'clock, you will remember about 30% of what you learned in the morning. So that's a human. That's how the human mind works.
Correct.
And after a week, if you look, you will remember about 20%, and maybe after a year, you will
remember the meal.
You'll remember that experience. I was there at Hilton. So, in order to negate this situation, one of the tools what we can use is there's a nice element, we call it 70-20-10 approach. Whereas, you limit your formal learning experience to a 10% of all your learning interventions.
Formal learning is 10%.
10%.
This is interesting.
Yeah. And so, those are like you attend training programs, you attend workshops and stuff. And 20% you will learn from others.
At work.
At work.
Peer learning.
Could be peer learning, even like you will go to a different industry and talk to someone. It's more or less coaching and mentoring. Understood. That you talk to someone. So, it becomes a dual learning perspective. The person who goes to learn from a superior will also learn, and by way of passing down my knowledge, I will tend to brush up my knowledge. So, that's a two-way process. The other element, which is the chunk of it, which is a 70%, is learning on the job. That you get people to experiment things, learn while they are on the job. So, in organizations, Taridu, if you do L&D on a structured basis, what you will have, every individual will have an individual development plan.
Okay. That
will specify A, B, C, D, what are your development interventions for this year, and what are the gaps that you are going to address, what you are going to bridge through these interventions. So, your objective is clear and your interventions are clear, and all these requirements that you will list according to 70-20-10. And So, let us say if I want to go, if I am in a factory environment, if I want to go learn a certain pneumatic system in a machine, rather than me sitting in a classroom, that I will be sent to the factory, I will work with someone, I will touch the machine, I will go through it, I will have hands on, and which will really embed deep down in me.
Because we remember better what we do.
Yes, we know, I will remember it, because when we study those days, Tarindu, if we read it like through the mind, like you will not remember it. But if you recite it again,
correct,
then you tend to remember it more.
And Kaushal, just to interrupt there, now we see even in your organization, we see sometimes the senior most executives, they still go to the outlets and they are actually working on the product, isn't it?
Yes, because that keeps refreshing. Because you got to keep refreshing. So, this is one element what you can do, Tarindu, in terms of making it a sustainable journey.
Understood.
Now, since you asked me on the element of training programs, if you send a person for a training program, you can't expect miracles, but what you need to do is you need to anchor.
Correct.
If you send someone for a training program today, you need to have follow-up sessions with him to understand how he is doing, to get feedback from his superiors to say whether there is any improvement, have discussions. So, that reinforcement needs to take place.
Kaushal, on a final note from you, I would like to ask, what about KPIs? What are the KPIs that a HR person or maybe a team leader could use to measure the effectiveness of the learning and development process of that organization? Because what gets measured gets controlled.
Yes. Good old days we used to count training man days, training man hours.
Wow. How many hours?
Number of training programs, and you were able to put number of hours and we were happy. Training feedback, how many goods and bads. But I think it has shifted significantly.
When you say it has shifted now, there is a more stronger connection between performance and L&D. They try to measure a stronger performance.
Yes. Tarindu, if we go through the structured approach, the best thing what we can look at is how are the operational KPIs transformed through this intervention. For an example, let's say, let's take a finance department, and we've identified the Excel skills as a learning need, and we send them to training program, and they use the formulas, advanced techniques of calculations when they come back. Imagine if they used to spend 5 hours in doing that, and right now they are doing it in 3 hours, which means every person saves 2 hours into 6 people in the function, into 20 man days a month. So, that is the saving that you calculate. So, just to see how it has reflected on your business, that is number one. Number two is to get feedback from their superiors as to how they are performing, how have their productivity, how is their behavior has changed. Because when we said that we want to shape certain cultures, we want to promote certain behaviors, whether it has really happened. It is not only the line managers, but their stakeholders, their colleagues, their customers, and also to see whether they are in a position to cascade this knowledge to someone else. Because if you do not have the luxury to send all your employees to training programs. Correct. So, you send a few, you get them to learn, come back and share the knowledge.
So, to what extent they are sharing the knowledge is also a KPI they should be looking at.
Exactly. So, these are some of the KPIs what we can use, because ideally what you need to do is you need to tie it up with the productivity, with the operational excellence. Those are the two measures which is really imperative in terms of driving value through L&D in an organization.
Kaushal, thank you so much for having joined us today and sharing your valuable thoughts on how to make L&D actually a strategic initiative, and also stop making it just an ad hoc or one-off thing, integrate it into the larger plan. And as you very correctly said, don't just send people for programs for the sake of learning and development, connect it with what they do, and that way, and give them that hands-on experience so that it will bring out the best in them. Thank you so much for joining us, and wish you good luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you, Tarindu. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Coming up on the other side of this short break, when it comes to learning and development, do women tend to learn differently than men? Well, that's up for debate, and stay tuned. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics. Our focus today is on the learning and development function of an organization. How do we do this right? How can we make it effective? And most importantly, how can we ensure that the investments we do into learning and development will give us the maximum returns. You heard the thoughts from Kaushal. Well, now let's talk to a different personality. Joining me for this segment is the head of learning and development of a leading conglomerate of Sri Lanka, who is none other than Amali Abesundara. Amali, welcome to Bisnomics.
Thank you, Taridu. Nice to be here with you.
Pleasure is always ours, Amali. Amali, I have to ask this question from you. Being a lady, now you directly handle the learning and development for the people of your organization. For the knowledge of any HR personality who is watching this show, when it comes to learning, do men and women tend to differ in terms of how they prefer to learn? What are your thoughts?
One thing we all agree, Taridu, so men and women are biologically different. So yes, the preferences are also different. Like when parents get to know that they are going to have a son, they will paint the room in blue. If they are going to have a daughter, pink.
Yes.
So and girls always go for dolls and boys for cars. So there are preferences. But when it comes to learning and development in an organization, it works in a different way. Because learning and development works in different level, like organizational level, then going back to department level, then team level, then the individual level. In the individual level, learning and development task is to develop that person to deliver whatever the assigned task and develop that person into achieve the next level of performance, or maybe for their career advancement or advancement. So despite their gender, so learning and development mechanisms always remain same up to now. For example, assume a lady decides to become a soldier. That lady has to go through the same hardcore training.
Absolutely.
As a man. So there are no mechanisms today on gender preferences. So because of that reason, in L&D today, Tarindu, though there can be preferences,
correct,
it is not considered. What is considered in L&D is the personality. So we talk of, so we say we live in a more inclusive world. We speak about representation, diversity, equality, gender balance. So because of those reasons, any personality who suits for the post can apply and get selected for the despite their gender. So because of that reason, in a L&D function of an organization, gender preferences are not yet considered in learning. But I thought it's an interesting topic, you know. I think there is a room for further investigation, further studies, further research, and maybe it could be one of the most widely discussed topic in future.
Some very valid thoughts there. Let's talk about balancing the day-to-day work plus the learning and development, because now you will have executives, employees who have to do their day-to-day work, and then also we are telling them now you need to also learn new things. Easier said than done. I'm sure you have heard the comment from some of your employees who might say, okay, do you want us to do what we have to do, or do you want us to learn new things? Tell us to pick one.
Yeah.
But of course, both have to happen hand in hand.
Yes.
Once again, easier said than done. But how do you make it happen, Amali?
One thing we all have to admit, Tarindu, we are imperfect and there is always room for improvement. Keeping my job aside, one thing, as a mother, I always think I have to improve myself. In the same way as a wife, as a daughter, as a sister, and as a citizen, there are needs for improvement, right? If you think in that way, I think the learning need comes, right? So that mindset drives you to become more effective and efficient. So you will find your time, because for example, assume that because I want to become more effective mother for my son, and I want to cook him a good meal. So you don't have to attend a cookery class. So on the way back home, I can find a recipe on social media.
Correct.
Right? So if you have that mindset, so you will find your own time. So it's a kind of a paradigm shift. So if people believe and if people accept the fact that we are imperfect and there is a room for improvement, so people will find time. learning and development function is to facilitate that, Tarindu. So, I would say when there is a saying, if there is a will, there is a way.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, if someone is ready to learn, so learning and development responsibility is always to ultimate objective is to achieve the organizational goal while developing others. So, then company will facilitate in different methods. So, in that kind of a context, so as a learning and development professional, so we can introduce formulas like 70-20-10 rule. So, where people can learn socially and on the job. So, when you learn on the job, so they will be able to balance their work plus learn at the same time.
Makes sense.
Yes.
And Amali, the drive to the organization saying learn, upgrade, update yourself, be renewed as much as you can, that drive, do you think it should be coming right from the top management of the organization?
I would answer that in a different way, Tarindu. So, normally there should be a HR professional, L&D professional who is very good with collaborative skills, collaborative competencies to drive that the learning and development function of an organization. And then the leadership should embrace it and support it. So, if the leadership and the learning and development manager agree on something, and if their parties intervene and they are going on the same direction, so the learning and development interventions will be more successful.
I am going to spin a little googly to you here. What is your answer to a manager who might say, well, because this is a question or a statement that a lot of HR people get from some of their employees and executives. Things are working fine. Why do we need to train? Sales are good, or let's say the company is doing well. Why do we need to keep training? What's your answer to that?
I would say, Tarindu, because we need to improve ourselves.
So, no matter how good things are, there is still room for improvement.
Still room for improvement. And the best example is like the pandemic that we have faced. So, you can see if you just look back and see who have survived the pandemic, the people who have been able to gain required adequate the skills and the knowledge in order to face the challenges.
Amali, what you are saying is what Charles Darwin said, the one who will survive is the one who is most adaptable to change, and the pandemic just proved that.
Yes. So, then you can, when you go into some of the LinkedIn profiles, you can see some of their some of the people, the individuals, they have changed their career in a drastic way into a different level, because they have utilized this time period to gain a lot of other competencies.
Correct. So, what you are saying is no matter what the environment is, if you have invested in learning and development as a business or as a person, if you have invested your time, you will stay ahead of the game.
Yes.
Amali, on a final note, how can we make learning and development part of the corporate culture? I think I asked this from Kaushal as well, but in terms of making it a part of the company culture, where training and development or learning and development is a way of life in the organization, how do we make it happen? Right now, sometimes it may be seen as a cost, it may be seen as a burden. Now, you are heading the learning and development for your organization. So, I am sure you know what it takes to get other people to accept, because let us admit, maybe not everyone is passionate about learning and development like how you are passionate, am I right?
Yes.
So, then how do you make it a part of the way of life or the corporate culture of the organization?
Emphasizing what I said previously, if in a company, if from the CEO to chairman and a newly joined recruit believes if there is a room for improvement, right, that the learning and development automatically connects with the culture. Right, its learning and development function is to establish that mindset, and then in order to establish that, like I said before, the learning, there should be a good collaborative learning and development professional with a good collaborative skills, and then the leadership should accept it, and it has to be driven from top to bottom. And like Kaushal also mentioned, so a learning and development function also should be aligned with a reward mechanism, and then it should be it should address the personal development of people. So, basically people should see what is in it for me. So, in that way we will be able to establish a culture where we value learning and development to the development of the organization plus the people.
And Amali, as you very correctly said, I like one key word you mentioned, collaborative person, the L&D manager. Like for example, what you are saying is that you can't just come up with training programs and send people and forget about it. You need to then collaborate it with line managers, maybe marketing manager, production manager, and see whether whatever programs that people were sent for were actually bringing the expected results for the organization. Am I right?
Yes. Actually, those days we thought learning and development is conducting a one-day program where you go at 9 o'clock and you have breakfast, lunch and evening snacks and go back home. But now learning and development is part of OD interventions. OD intervention, organizational development interventions, are planned to develop a particular, improve a particular service or a criteria or a KPI of an organization. So, then when L&D function is embedded with the that particular OD intervention, so there are so many other things also involved. For example, the need analysis, then how to the control mechanisms, then how you assess it, maybe the surveys, and then reinforcement method. So, everything becomes.
When you say reinforcement, that is reminding people what they have learned, isn't it?
Of course. So, then reinforcement can be designed for the total intervention or maybe for the particular learning and development intervention as well. So, I will share a few of the things that we do in our organization. So, what we do is like when we complete one intervention, so we would be sending out videos, a summarized version of that particular intervention, 1 or 2 minute video, where in a particular day and a particular time. So, they expect that. So, then they will read it, they will watch it, and at the end of the video, so there is a small question that they have to answer. So, in that way they will never forget what they have learned initially.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Our focus today was on the learning and development function of an organization. Most importantly, how do we maximize the returns on the investments we do towards L&D, and how to make it work practically, how to make learning and development a part of the organization. And a very echoing message we heard in this entire discussion was about how learning and development of people also leads to organizational development. Amali, thank you for having joined us and for sharing your experience and thoughts about this very important industrial aspect of learning and development in organizations. Wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, Taridu.
And with that, we wrap up today's episode of Bisnomics. In the upcoming week, not only should you be busy making a profit, make sure you invest time towards learning and development as well. I'll see you with the next episode.